Are you on the editorial board of any journals?
Yes, I am on the editorial board of the California Journal of Politics and Policy, which is, again, it's based at UC Berkeley.
Your Honor, we would tender Professor Miller as an expert in the field of American politics and California politics.
Voir dire, Mr. Boies?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, although I think I would not dispute that the witness is an expert in some aspects of that very broad field, my concern is that from looking at the expert report, that he may be asked to opine on things like the political power of gays and lesbians, with respect to which I think no foundation has been laid for his expertise. So one of the things that I wonder is whether I could ask through the court for counsel to proffer what expert opinions, the basic expert opinions he expects to elicit. Because if it's within the area that he described that supports his expertise, I would have no objection. If it's outside, I would like to voir dire.
Very well. Mr. Thompson?
Yes, Your Honor, we think the political power of gays and lesbians is a subcomponent of American politics and California politics. So certainly Professor Miller is prepared to speak to that since he teaches classes and has written books on it.
Very well, then. Excuse me. Do you wish to voir dire the witness with respect to that subject?
I do, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Professor Miller.
Not yet. It's still morning.
Still morning? Whoa. It's been a long morning.
Yeah.
Good morning, Professor Miller. We haven't met. My name is David Boies, and I represent the plaintiffs. Have you written any peer-reviewed articles dealing with the power of gays and lesbians?
I guess it would depend on your definition. I believe that
Definition of what?
Of what the power of gays and lesbians. I would say yes. I would say that the article that I described of the French journal dealing with Proposition 8 dealt certainly with the power of gays and lesbians.
No, other than the French article that you have referred to, have you written any peer-reviewed articles relating to the power of gays and lesbians?
I can't say that I have any other peer-reviewed articles, no.
Okay, so let's focus on that French article. In the French article, what did you say about the power of gays and lesbians?
Well, one thing I said is that Proposition 8 lost. I mean, Proposition 8 won. So the gays and lesbians lost the election. And so to me, that's, as I described in the article, that's certainly an outcome that goes to the comparative political power of gays and lesbians.
That would be something that suggests they did not have political power, correct?
Well,
let me put it differently. That is not something that suggests that they do have political power. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's fair.
So your argument in the journal was that gays and lesbians had political power, but because Proposition 8 lost, they had power because Proposition 8 lost?
No,
is that what you're saying?
I don't think that was not my conclusion in the article.
Okay.
The article spoke about the campaigns on both sides, including the very strong campaign by the No on 8 side.
Well, in this French article, did you put forth any description or discussion of the political power of gays and lesbians, other than whatever political power you may infer from the fact that, that they campaigned against Proposition 8 and lost?
Well, I believe I talked to some extent about the coalition on, that supported the gay rights side. I talked about the role of President Obama in saying that he opposed Proposition 8, and so certainly I think that was, well, these were factors that went into political power and powerlessness.
Well, other than this article that you have just described, have you undertaken any independent scientific research in an attempt to analyze the political power of gays and lesbians?
Well, I've done a lot of work looking at ballot measures that affect gays and lesbians, so not just Proposition 8, but also Proposition 22, Amendment 2 in Colorado, Proposition 6 in California. All these are centrally, well, I mean, I think this is a central issue in this case, is whether gays and lesbians are able to exercise power in the direct democratic context. So yes, my work has been importantly focused on that topic.
And is that work which you describe, the political power of gays and lesbians, is that work recorded in any writings other than this French article? Any peer-reviewed articles other than this French article?
Yes. It's in my book, which was peer-reviewed by Cambridge University Press. There were peer reviewers of that book, certainly the manuscript of that book. And there was a lot in that book about the political power of gays and lesbians.
Now, do you hold yourself out as an expert on the extent of discrimination against gays and lesbians?
Yes. I think that outcomes go to the issue of discrimination. If gays and lesbians are able to achieve positive outcomes in the political process, then that would affect, or it would be evidence. One could draw inferences about their ability to overcome discrimination.
Well, my question is not so much right now what you conclude, but what you hold yourself out to be as an expert in the history and existence or non-existence of discrimination against gays and lesbians. Is that correct?
I would say less so about the history, but more so about the present level of discrimination, the ability of the gay and lesbian movement to overcome discrimination to achieve their political goals. And I think that I can say that I believe that I am an expert on this question, yes.
On the question of whether gays and lesbians experience discrimination today, are you an expert on that, in your view?
In my view, yes, I think so.
Okay. Are you an expert as to whether gays and lesbians have experienced discrimination over the last 50 years?
I would say that that has then been a focus of my research.
I'm simply asking you, sir, whether you hold yourself out as an expert in that or not.
Well, I would say in the course of this work as an expert in this case, I have learned more about it for sure, and I think that I can probably write an article on this topic at this point. But I haven't written on it before. I think that my expertise is more in the contemporary period as opposed to what you described 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, then what would you say were the most important academic writings on the subject of discrimination against gays and lesbians today?
So my area of work where I'm most familiar with literature goes to legal writings, and so I would say work by Dan Piniella about Professor Eskridge.
Say again?
Professor Eskridge.
No, say again.
Professor Eskridge. Susan Mezzi. These would be some people that I would say would be important scholars in this area.
And you would recognize those three people as important scholars in the area whose work that you rely on. Is that correct?
I think that they would be important scholars in this area.
Now, with respect to the question of political power of gays and lesbians, is your expertise on that limited to the present time?
I would say that it's, I'm not holding myself out as an expert on the full history of the gay and lesbian rights movement. I have read about it, and so I think that I have a view of the trajectory of the movement based on what I have read. But I would say that it's fair to say that my, the deeper knowledge is on the more contemporary period, say from the 1970s forward.
For example, at your deposition, you were not aware of what the Mattachine Society was. Were you?
I could not recall what that was at the time.
Well, have you researched that since?
I did take a look and did some further investigation and learned that the Mattachine Society, yes, as being founded by Harry Heyck around 1950 and being an important early gay rights organization.
And did it play a particular role in the 1970s, that area that you said you were an expert in?
Well, yeah. There are different iterations of this society. It was founded first in Los Angeles and then had other organizations.
Well, all I was asking is whether it played a particular role in the 1970s, which was the period you said you had expertise in. Answer that question, yes or no.
I believe that I did, yes.
But nevertheless, that is something you were familiar with at the time you did your expert report, correct?
That's something I've learned about and read about more extensively since then.
And at your deposition, you were not aware of whether the General Social Survey, when they began asking respondents whether they were gay or lesbian, correct?
That's correct.
And would you explain for the record what a General Social Survey is?
Okay, this is a important major survey that political scientists do of, well, to get information about various questions, public opinion, so forth.
And at the time of your deposition, you didn't know who Alan Stier was, did you?
That's correct.
And you didn't know who Elaine Noble was, correct?
That's correct.
Now, since your deposition, have you discovered who those people were?
No, I haven't done further investigation on those.
So you don't know that Alan Stier was the first openly gay man elected to state office?
I
You
didn't
don't
no.
know that Elaine Noble was the first openly gay woman elected to state office?
I didn't know that, no.
And that they were elected in 1976 and 1975, respectfully?
Again, I didn't know their names, no. I knew that openly gay people were first elected to office in the mid-1970s.
Uh-huh. Okay. Your Honor, we would object to his qualification as an expert in the areas of discrimination against gays and lesbians or in gay and lesbian political power outside of the particular area of initiatives. Now, in the area of initiatives, we think he has been qualified as an expert. But outside that area, he has not published any peer-reviewed articles. He has not done any research. He is not recognized as an expert in that field. He doesn't even know many of the key facts or key people involved.
It seems to me that this witness's qualifications to offer opinion testimony with respect to American politics and California politics in particular is not disputed. Implicit in that area of expertise is knowledge of the influence and power of particular groups in American and California politics. I think it's therefore appropriate that he can include in his area of expertise testimony having to do with the roles of gays and lesbians in American and California politics. I don't understand that the defendants are offering the witness as an expert in a history of discrimination against gays and lesbians.
Correct, Your Honor, we are not.
So, to the degree that the witness's testimony spills beyond what he's being offered for and testifying concerning the history of American and California politics and the roles of various groups within it, I think that I will admit the testimony and weigh that testimony in accordance with what is brought out in direct and cross-examination. So you may proceed, Mr. Thompson.
Professor Miller, what are in the key determinants of political power?
Political power is multifaceted. It has a lot of different factors that can contribute to power, and I would just list a few of them. One would be certainly money, access to lawmakers, the size and cohesion of a group, the ability to attract allies and form coalitions, and the ability to persuade.
All right, and I would like to publish demonstrative 2. Could you explain what is the relative importance of money in the American political system?
Well, I think any political scientist would tell you that money is a critical asset for achieving political power. If you just look at the Citizen United case in recent days, the strong reaction by both sides about the changing rules, about how money can be used in politics demonstrates clearly that money is an important factor in the political process. Specifically with respect to elections, either candidate elections or ballot measure elections, money allows a group to be heard, to be able to get out their message to the electorate and to the voters and make the ultimate decisions.
And what, if anything, does the Proposition 8 campaign demonstrate about the ability of gays and lesbians to raise money in support of their political goals?
What was striking to me, the amount of money that was raised on both sides of the election of Proposition 8. 43 million were raised and spent by the opponents of Proposition 8, which exceeded very large contributions and expenditures by the No on 8 campaign. By the Yes on 8. I'm going to get this right yet.
Now, with respect to your database that you have collected at the Rose Institute, of all the initiatives that have been held in the United States, how many groups have raised more than 43 million as part of a ballot initiative campaign?
Well, it's exceptionally rare. You know, there is no other social issue that's ever involved this kind of money. There has been a few measures involving regulatory issues, Indian gaming, things like that, that have been in this neighborhood or even larger. But for a social issue where there's not sort of a corporate interest on one side or the other that's basically funding the campaign, this is exceptional.
And I would like to publish demonstrative 3. And what is the significance of access to lawmakers?
Again, political scientists would all agree that having access to lawmakers is an important resource for a group, for any group, particularly a minority group. That's in part because powerful lawmakers, they have, well, time for them is a scarce resource. There's a lot of people who want time with them, and so they have to make decisions about how to spend their time, who to give them to, give time to, rather. So just getting access in where there's a scarce resource demonstrates that the group has some form of political power. Additionally, access is important because it raises the visibility of the group's issue that they are promoting, and if they can get access to the legislature, then they're able to increase the visibility of their issue. I would say third, access is important because it gives the group distinctive ability to persuade the lawmaker. If the group is shut out, doesn't have any ability to get a meeting with a lawmaker, then it's more difficult to make that group's case. And so access facilitates persuasion. The fourth thing that I would say is maybe not as well recognized, but it's partly based on my time studying this and actually working in a couple of legislatures, is that lawmakers have incredible political networks. And if you are an interest group that wants to promote your agenda, getting access to the lawmakers will sometimes facilitate your ability to get connected to other people in the lawmakers' political network and to form a coalition.
And how would that work?
Well, the lawmaker would, if the lawmaker was sympathetic to the group's objectives, then the lawmaker might say, well, you should probably, so for example, if the gays and lesbians had a particular legislative agenda and they needed to build a larger coalition, the lawmaker was sympathetic. The lawmaker might also have alliances with unions or other groups, so the lawmaker could set up meetings and make introductions, those sorts of things.
I would like to publish demonstrative number 4. How, if at all, does the size and cohesion of a group affect its political power?
Starting with size is obviously an advantage to a group. If a group has large numbers, and that can be translated into a larger number of votes, and in democratic majoritarian process, the closer you can get to a majority is obviously to your advantage. And that's, well, there is a little bit of a caveat about that, because if your group is not cohesive, well, it can be large, but it can be internally divided as to what its objectives are. So cohesion, in addition to size, are important assets in attaining political power.
And for minority groups, to what extent, if any, because they have by definition a small size, do they have to rely on coalition partners?
Well, I would say in the American political system, which is a pluralistic, and you have lots of interest groups, again, this is sort of a Madisonian view of American politics with multiplicity of groups or factions in the society. Basically, everybody has to form coalitions and make alliances in order to achieve their political goals. If you are a minority group, particularly a smaller minority group, then the coalition building and forming alliances becomes even more important to you attaining your goals or your objectives.
I would like to publish demonstrative 5 and ask you, which groups, if any, are allied politically with gays and lesbians today?
Well, based on my analysis of recent political history and the way things work, I would say that the Democratic Party over the last decade certainly has become a strong ally of the LGBT rights move in California and also nationally. The second important ally for gays and lesbians have been elected officials at all levels of government, from Congress and the White House all the way down to local government, state legislatures as well. The third group has been organized labor. And as I examined this, I was struck by the extent to which organized labor has coalesced as a strong ally of the LGBT rights movement, particularly around this area of recognition of same-sex relationships. Fourth group is corporations, and this is increasingly true. The evidence suggests that major corporations are becoming increasingly allied with the LGBT rights movement. I guess this is the fifth important ally of gays and lesbians have been newspapers. I have done a systematic investigation of California newspapers, but also national newspapers like the New York Times that have been important allies of gays and lesbians in the LGBT rights movement. Another asset can be celebrities, because they can provide, they can garner media attention for the group's interests, provide positive associations for the group. Next would be churches and faith-based religious organizations. These groups are often organized, and they can get volunteers to help on political campaigns. So if you have alliances with churches and faith-based organizations, that can be an important asset for you in attaining political power. And finally, another group would be professional associations of physicians, doctors, others who can be important allies in the political process as well.
Well, let's look at each of those allies one at a time, and I would like to publish demonstrative 6. And I ask you, how powerful is the Democratic Party in California today?
Again, this was part of my work on that book, The New Political Geography of California. I looked deeply at this issue and traced how the political balance in the state has shifted from basically a 50-50 situation in 1980 where Republicans and Democrats were comparable politically in terms of their power in the state. That's really changed in the last generation so that the Democratic Party in California is the dominant political party in the state. There's a few statistics that would provide evidence for that. One is voter registration. The most recent statistics I found were from the Secretary of State's office in February of 2009. Democrats were 45% of registered voters, 45.5% of registered voters in California, where Republicans had dropped to 31.1% of the electorate. The balance is either small parties or declined to state, but that's a major gap between Democrats and Republicans in voter registration. A second measure would be elected officials in the state. If you look at the state assembly, the current, actually this has changed a bit. There has been a couple of elections so that the, we are at 49 to 29 Democrats to Republicans with one independent and one open seat. So that's still a very, it's a large gap between Democrats and Republicans in the state assembly. In the state Senate, there are 25 Democrats and 15 Republicans, a gap of 10 legislators. So the Democrats don't have quite a two-thirds majority in the state legislature, but it's a substantial majority, and there's no filibuster rule or anything like that in the state legislature. If the Democrats want to pass something through the legislature, which the exception of the state budget, which requires a two-thirds vote, they are basically able to do anything they want legislatively. At the state constitutional officer level, there are 8 separately elected state constitutional offices in California. 5 of those 8 are currently held by Democrats. From, well, the lieutenant governorship is vacant now that John Garamendi has gone to Congress, but the Attorney General, Secretary of State, Treasurer, Controller, the Superintendent of Public Construction. I think I'm getting those all. Those are all held by Democrats. In the United States Congress, the congressional delegation from California, which was again a 50-50, I think it was 22 to 21 in 1980, Democrat to Republican. There has been a major shift towards the Democratic Party. Today, 34 of our 53 House members from California are Democrat, as well as for many years now, both senators, U.S. Senators, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, are both Democrats. And finally, I would note that in the last presidential election, President Obama won 60.95% of the statewide popular vote. Now, that's the largest popular vote percentage in any election by any candidate since 1936, whether FDR won in a landslide election. So this is showing that there's well, really, this is a blue state, is the way that I would put it.
Now, turning to demonstrative 7, to what extent, if any, does the Democratic Party in California support the political goals of gays and lesbians?
So the Democratic Party in its public statements, the California Democratic in its public statements has come out strongly in fair enough of LGBT rights. In its 2008 party platform, the California Democratic Party said, quote, "We take pride in and celebrate our diversity and work to foster the common values and commitments that unite all people, regardless of their age, cultural heritage, national origin, disability, socioeconomic status, gender, race, sexual orientation, or views on religion." The platform went on to say that it pledges to fight for all people to live with dignity and equality. California Democrats will support non-discrimination and equally for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in all aspects of their lives. We support the LGBT community in its quest for the right to legal marriage.
Now, beyond the platform, what other recent statements, if any, has the Democratic Party made in support of the political goals of gays and lesbians?
Notably, after Proposition 8 was passed in November of 2008, the California Democratic Party adopted a resolution. This was in April 26, 2009. It was titled, Support Same-Sex Couples in Their Right to Marry by Repealing Proposition 8. And the resolution read as follows. Therefore, be it resolved that the California Democratic Party stands in solidarity with same-sex couples and their fight to retain the right to marry by joining with them in urging the voters of the state of California to repeal Proposition 8 within the next 2 years should it be upheld by the Supreme Court. And by that, they meant the California Supreme Court.
All right. Now, turning to Demonstrative 8, to what extent have elected officials in California been political allies of gays and lesbians?
Okay, I can run through the 8 statewide elected officials, starting with Governor Schwarzenegger. I would characterize Governor Schwarzenegger as being an ally of the LGBT community. Now, that's, when we're talking about allies, it's not necessarily on every issue every time, but on many issues. And increasingly so, the governor has supported the LGBT rights movement. He signed LGBT rights legislation, including most recently legislation which recognized same-sex marriages from other states. Now, other evidence of his support for the LGBT rights movement is that he opposed the federal marriage amendment. He also opposed Proposition 8. And in this litigation, the governor to defend Proposition 8 against the plaintiff's constitutional challenge.
Now, who plays a role in controlling access to the governor of California?
The most important gatekeeper would be the governor's chief of staff. That's true in most gubernatorial administrations, and it's true here as well.
And who is the governor's chief of staff?
The governor's chief of staff is Susan Kennedy.
And what is your opinion about whether she is an ally of the gay and lesbian political rights?
Well, Miss Kennedy is herself an openly lesbian person, and she is, I would guess, a strong advocate of LGBT rights. She has made that very clear in public pronouncements as well.
Now, with respect to the most recent lieutenant governor, to what extent, if any, was he an ally of gays and lesbians?
John Garamendi, a longtime elected official in California, former lieutenant governor, now a member of Congress, was clearly an advocate of LGBT rights. He endorsed legislative efforts to make California marriage laws gender neutral, and he also opposed Proposition 8.
All right. And turning to demonstrative number 9, what is your opinion about the level of support that Attorney General Jerry Brown has showed toward the political goals of gays and lesbians?
So the Attorney General, the former governor, potential future governor of California, is, in my view, a strong ally of the LGBT rights movement. One of the leading LGBT rights organizations in California, Equality California, has recognized the governor or the Attorney General's support for its movement. The director of Equality California, Greg Kors, stated, Equality California is extremely appreciative of the Attorney General's continued leadership in opposition to Proposition 8 and in support of ending discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT Californians. The time has come for all elected leaders to follow Jerry Brown's example and stand up for equality for all Americans regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. Equality California will continue our position of not endorsing or supporting any candidate for any level of public office who does not completely and unequivocally support total equality for our community.
Now, what is your opinion to the extent to which, if any, Secretary of State Vaughn has been an ally of the gay and lesbian political community?
Against. I would say that the Secretary of State has been a notable ally of the community. She has asserted so herself in a 2007 letter recognizing LGBT Pride Month. The Secretary of State wrote, quote, I am proud to stand with you in the continued fight for equal rights under the law as your Secretary of State, as I stood with you at every turn during my 14-year tenure in the legislature on civil rights issues.
All right. And turning to demonstrative 10, what level of support, if any, has the treasurer shown to the political goals of gays and lesbians?
So the current state treasurer, Bill Lockyer, a former two-term attorney general, former state legislator, has become a strong ally of the LGBT rights movement. In 2003, he endorsed the landmark domestic partnership law, which was enacted by the legislature. He opposed Proposition 8. He made monetary contributions to the No on 8 campaign. And when he was running for treasurer, Equality California's executive director, Greg Kors, wrote, quote, "Bill scored a perfect 100% on our candidate questionnaire, and we are confident that he will be a hard-working advocate for civil rights on quality for all in the treasurer's office."
And with respect to the controller, what level of support, if any, has he shown to the political goals of gays and lesbians?
John Chang, the state controller, is also considered a strong proponent of LGBT rights. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force stated that, quote, "Chang has been a steadfast ally of LGBT people throughout his career in public life. An opponent of Proposition 8, he has spoken out for marriage equality for committed same-sex couples through Pride season and throughout the year."
Turning to demonstrative 11. What is your opinion
Your Honor,
that...
I'm going to object on the ground that all that's being done here is using these demonstratives as leading questions. What's happening is he's putting up a demonstrative and the witness is essentially reading it into the record.
Your Honor, these are not yes or no questions. This is consistent with what Professor Badgett did, and this is the witness. I'm happy to refer to the documents in the binder, Your Honor. I thought this would be a more efficient way to quickly move, and we're making very good progress, I'm happy to say.
Well, I wouldn't want to interfere with your progress. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. So just to quickly round out the picture, Professor, with respect to the Superintendent of Public Instruction, to what extent, if any, has he been an ally of the gay and lesbian political rights movement?
Jack O'Connell, the superintendent, has been a strong ally. Evidence for that was he was on a television commercial advocating the defeat of Proposition 8.
All right. Now, turning to demonstrative 12. How much support, if any, is there in the California legislature for the goals of lesbians and gays?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's striking, the degree of support for the LGBT rights movement by the California legislature over the past decade, particularly in the legislature's majority Democratic caucus.
And which was the first state in the union to have an official caucus for openly LGBT state legislators?
California was the state to do that. It was, there have been 8 members of the LGBT caucus over time, and there are currently 4 members of that caucus.
All right, and turning to demonstrative 13. How supportive are leading local officials in California of the political goals of gays and lesbians?
Well, so there are many local officials who have publicly supported the LGBT rights community or the LGBT community and rights for that community. Most notably is the mayor of this city, San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom, who is a nationally recognized advocate of same-sex marriage and the rights of gays and lesbians. Second largest city in America, Los Angeles, has a mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, who has been a strong advocate of LGBT rights. He publicly opposed Proposition 8 and made a monetary contribution of $25,000 to the No on 8 campaign. And another example we have seen in this case was the mayor of the Republican mayor of San Diego, Jerry Sanders, who clearly publicly is an ally of the LGBT community.
All right, and turning to demonstrative 14. To what extent, if any, have local governments supported the political goals of gays and lesbians?
So evidence of this would be advocating legislation that would promote domestic partner benefits or same-sex marriage or both. And a number of governments, including the city and county of San Francisco, cities of Berkeley, Cloverdale, Davis. If you go through the state, it would include in the south San Diego. In the Los Angeles area, you've got West Hollywood, Long Beach. And so throughout the state, many city governments and county governments have supported LGBT rights publicly.
All right, very well. And turning to demonstrative 15. To what extent, if any, do gays and lesbians have allies among California's federal representatives?
Well, again, as I mentioned, many of the California's federal elected officials are supportive of LGBT rights. These would include our 2 U.S. senators, Senator Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is also an ally of the LGBT rights movement.
All right, and turning to demonstrative 16. I would like to shift gears, and you had mentioned in the beginning that organized labor was, in your opinion, an ally. Please describe the relationship between the gay rights movement and organized labor.
Well, again, as I said, I think it's striking to the extent to which organized labor has coalesced in support of the LGBT rights movement. There is evidence for this in contributions to ballot measures, ballot measure campaigns, the No on 8 campaign, as well as supporting legislation in the state legislature. So if you look at the roster of every major liberal organization in California, from the California Teachers Association, one of the most powerful interests in the state, the Service Employees International Union, Public Employees Union, as well as the private sector unions. AFL, CIO, the Teamsters, the farm workers, basically every major labor organization I can think of has come out publicly in support of the LGBT rights movement.
All right. And turning to demonstrative 17. How else, if at all, has organized labor supported the rights of gays and lesbians?
Well, just to take a couple of examples I just mentioned, the California Teachers Association, which has over 340,000 members and is widely considered by people who study California politics to be one of the most powerful interest groups in the state, has promoted same-sex marriage in California. They donated, well, the union, out of union dues, donated $1.3 million to the No on 8 campaign. And after the election, they also filed an amicus brief seeking invalidation of Proposition 8. In addition, another large and influential union in California, the California State Council of the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, donated $500,000 to the No on 8 campaign, and also supported same-sex marriage legislation in the legislature and signed an amicus brief seeking the invalidation of Proposition 8.
All right.
So those would be two examples of major unions in California.
All right. Now, turning to demonstrative 18. You mentioned newspapers. Please describe the level of support, if any, for the political goals of gays and lesbians among newspapers.
Okay. In connection with my expert report, I looked at the editorial endorsements of the 23 largest newspapers in California by circulation. And of those 23, 21 of the 23 endorsed a No on 8 position. Two of the the remaining two out of the 23 did not take a position on one way or another. So there was no major newspaper in California that took the Yes on 8 position. And just to mention some of the most major ones, the Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Jose Mercury News, these were major urban newspapers in the sort of the more liberal areas of the state. But if you also look at a place like the Orange County Register, not necessarily known as a liberal newspaper, also came out in opposition to Proposition 8.
All right. And turning to corporations, how would you describe the relationship between major corporations and the political goals of gays and lesbians?
I would say that this is another striking development over the past decade or more, which is to say that major corporations have internally in their own employment practices and also in their engagement in public policy issues, have become increasingly allied with the LGBT rights movement. So evidence of that would be reports put out annually by the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBT rights organization. They have done extensive work analyzing the policies and practices of the nation's largest corporations. I think the 2010 survey looked at 590 of these large corporations, and they rated them on a number of measures as to whether they were supportive or not of the LGBT community and LGBT rights. The findings of that report, called the Corporate Equality Index in 2010, were that 305 of these major corporations achieved a 100% rating on this organization's survey. 99% of these employers provide employment protection on the basis of sexual orientation. Another category that was part of the criteria was that the extent to which corporations were advocating on behalf of the LGBT rights in communities in the political process. Now, the report found that major employers, quote, stepped forward in unprecedented ways, including steadfast support for marriage equality in California.
All right. Now, let's talk about that specifically, about what corporations did in response to Proposition 8, and turning to demonstrative 20. How did Google respond to Proposition 8?
Okay, Google, which is, as everyone knows, the world's largest internet company and one of the most important businesses in the state of California, typically doesn't take positions on controversial political issues. But prior to the vote on Prop 8, Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, issued a message on the Google blog that urged a no vote on Proposition 8.
And what about Silicon Valley more generally? What position did they take on Proposition 8?
Okay, shortly after Google took the stand, other Silicon Valley major players, including Yahoo, Cisco, eBay, sort of the who's who of Silicon Valley, the leaders of those organizations formed an organization and came out publicly in opposition to Proposition 8. In October, just about a week before the election, the end of October, they issued a full-page ad in the San Jose Mercury News, which read as follows: "As Silicon Valley leaders, we are committed to equality and fairness. We are opposed to Proposition 8 because it would change our state constitution to take away rights from one group of people. Vote no on Proposition 8 on November 4th.
Okay. And turning to the next demonstrative, to what extent did these words of corporate leaders translate into action?
So if you conceded action to include making major political contributions, well, that would be one, certainly. If you look at contributions to gay rights organizations, the list of major corporate contributors to Equality California, as just one example among many, would include major co-conspirators such as AT&T, Time Warner Cable, Clear Channel, Kaiser Permanente, Southern California Edison. So this is not just tech companies. I mean, this is a wide range of major corporations that do business in California, made contributions according to the Equality California website, totaling $5,000 to $250,000 or above.
Okay, now, to what extent, if any, has the entertainment industry supported the political goals of gays and lesbians?
So I would say, I think it's fair to say that the entertainment industry generally, although maybe not 100%, has supported the LGBT rights movement. But certainly as an industry, it's been, in my view, supportive. Some evidence of this is that corporations and individuals in the industry made major financial contributions to the No on 8 campaign or have otherwise supported the movement for same-sex marriage. Some of those people include, or organizations include, Lucasfilms, David Geffen, Steven Spielberg, Kate Capshaw, Brad Pitt, Ellen DeGeneres, Stephen King, Michael King, and Mr. Reiner as well.
Your Honor, we have come to a logical stopping point. I'm happy to keep going if the court would like, but I notice it's getting close to the lunch hour.
I think it is. All right. Why don't we take until 10 minutes after the hour, and we'll resume then with further examination of Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Very well.
Your Honor, I do apologize. There's one thing I do want to raise. We thought it might facilitate the court's review of the pink and the yellow. We have next to the pink specified the page and line number that we contend we are designated counter to. In other words, the pink and the yellow don't tell you what we are designating against. So next to each pink, we have written, here's the page and the line number that we are countering to. And we thought that would facilitate the court's review. And if there's no objection, we would like to hand that up.
I assume no objection, Mr. Boutros?
No objection, Your Honor. What color is it?
I'm not sure.
All right. Very well. I'll see you at 10 minutes after 1. Mr. Thompson, you may continue your cross-examination of the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We'd like to publish the next demonstrative. Professor, what level of support have progressive religions provided to the political goals of gays and lesbians?
If we look at progressive religious communities, they have been increasingly supportive of LGBT rights and the rights of same-sex marriage. Evidence of this would be the California Council of Churches, which is an umbrella organization that includes many faith-based organizations and churches throughout the state. And many of those denominations supported that organization, in which these denominations are part, supported same-sex marriage and opposed Proposition 8. Some examples of member organizations include the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Christian Church, Church of the Brethren, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, the United Church of Christ, the United Methodist Church, This is not an exhaustive list. It's just some of the members of that organization.
And what role, if any, did these organizations play in the Prop 8 campaign?
Well, the member organizations, as well as the umbrella organization, many of them were active in the attempt to defeat Proposition 8. And that was evidenced by phone banking and sending out direct mail and other activities, as well as various contributions that they made to the campaign. So I would say that the progressive religious organizations were actively involved in the opposition to Proposition 8.
In addition to Proposition 8, what, if anything, have these progressive religions done to support the political goals of gays and lesbians?
Well, California Council of Churches has a lobbying arm. They have worked within the California legislature to promote legislation in favor of LGBT rights, and including Senator Leno's bill, AB 43, to seek to end the ban on same-sex marriage in California. They also, the organization also filed an amicus brief in the case in the California Supreme Court challenging Proposition 8 after the election.
All right. Now, what is your understanding of the intensity of support for same-sex marriage among progressive religious groups?
I think there might be a range. But I think increasingly among many progressive religious organizations, they've come to the conclusion that this is a social justice issue, civil rights issue, and it's consistent with their view of the religious faith that it's important to advocate on behalf of LGBT rights and the rights of same-sex marriage. Some of the denominations that I listed there are somewhat internally divided on this question, and there's debate internally within these churches. I think increasingly you are seeing among progressive religious organizations increasing support for LGBT rights. And there's a high level of intensity in many of these organizations, and they seek this as, well, some of them see this as their primary work, that this is a major issue of the day, and they want to advocate on behalf of gays and lesbians.
Excuse me. Mr. Thompson, let me ask, of these denominations that are described in the demonstrative,
the prior one.
Well, let's go back to 23, please.
in the first group, do all of these religious denominations perform same-sex marriages?
Looking through the list, no, not all of them do. Some of them. So the California Council of Churches is an umbrella organization.
Which ones do and which ones do not?
I would have to take a closer look at that. I believe that the United Church of Christ does. The United Methodist Church is internally divided on this question, and I think they've had retired United Methodist pastors who perform that same-sex marriages. I don't know exactly the status for the Episcopal Church at this point. There has been some recent developments in the Episcopal Church, so I would have to take a closer look at that. But you have a situation where oftentimes in California, the local denominations and structures of these organizations may have a view on this which is more progressive and liberal than the national or global communion, for example with Anglicanism. So I would say within California, all these groups have joined the California Council of Churches. California Council of Churches has taken public positions on these issues in favor of LGBT rights and same-sex marriages.
Okay, and turning to demonstrative 24, how does the level of religiosity in California compare to other states?
So this is information from the Pew Research Center. They have done surveys of well-respected organizations. And according to their research, California is one of the 10 least religious states in the United States, with over 20% of the population in these surveys claiming that they have no religious affiliation, and a third of Californians saying they seldom or never attend religious services. So I think it's fair to say California is a more secular, less religious state than most of the United States.
And turning your attention to professional associations, to what extent, if any, do gays and lesbians have political allies among prominent professional associations?
I think it's, again, fair to say that most of the major professional associations have increasingly allied with the LGBT rights movement and with gays and lesbians. Some examples would be associations of psychologists, psychiatrists, university professors, bar associations, both national and local bar associations.
Now, with respect to university professors, how, if at all, can university professors have an impact on political allies?
Well, in my experience, professors function in a number of different arenas. One is their teaching function, so they're obviously communicating a perspective on these matters to their students, and that's a major, I think, role in which persuasion can have an effect in making social change. Professors also are often public intellectuals, where they will write opinion pieces or testify before legislative bodies, or so forth. Many professors, both at the state and national level, move in and out of government service themselves. So many go on to serve in, for example, the administration, and we'll come back to academy after that.
Very well. And legal organizations, how, if at all, can they be political allies for a group?
So lawyers in general are very active in the political process. I mean, they oftentimes will run for office themselves, serve in office, be appointed positions. They also serve as gatekeeping function for the judiciary. They oftentimes will run for office themselves. All judges have been lawyers, at one time, so that's a gatekeeping function. They also, through the American Bar Association, give ratings for judicial appointments, and so these professional associations have an important function in shaping policy or public policy making arena as well.
All right, now, we have talked about allies. I'd like to turn your attention to another determinative political power which you identified, which is persuasion. How, if at all, does persuasion play a determinant of power?
Okay, so persuasion, by which I would mean the power of ideas, which is different than the power of contributing money or the power of coercion. The power of one's ideas is, in my view, an important factor that can be brought to bear in gaining political power. So you have an idea, and you're able to persuade a person in power that your idea is what should be acted on. And your ability to persuade that lawmaker is critical in the initiative process. That's basically what you got. What you've got. Your ability to persuade voters of your position on an issue. So in many different ways, persuasion, the power of one's ideas, is critical in that political process.
Well, can you provide an example of when the persuasive force of a group's ideas led to political outcome that was favorable to a group?
I think one classic example would be the civil rights movement for African Americans, where this was a group that was seen historically to have very little political power, which was, in my view, correct. So there was a challenge for how that group could achieve power in the political system. And one of the primary instruments that this movement used was the power of ideas, that being able to persuade the American people that the norm of equality, which Americans deeply hold as a core value in the norm of fairness, was being violated in their case. So they were able to make that case through persuasion of lawmakers and the general public of their case. So I think the norm of equality is something that can be used in a persuasive way to convince lawmakers of the rightness of your claim.
All right. Now, we've talked about determinants of power. I would like to switch gears and ask you about the indicia of power and what success, if any, have gays and lesbians had in electing candidates of their choice.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on California, and the evidence is that in this state there's been increasing success of the LGBT movement in being able to endorse candidates that win elections in California. Some evidence of that would come from Equality California, which regularly sort of assesses the level of progress they've had in basically electing candidates of their choice. From the last statewide election posted on the Equality California website, noted that Californians, quote, voted into the legislature and top state offices 95% of the candidates endorsed by Equality California's Political Action Committee, EQCA PAC. Now, the EQCA PAC endorsed 62 candidates for the legislature and state offices. A total of 59 of those candidates prevailed in yesterday's election, including newly elected Lieutenant Governor John Garamendi, Secretary of State Deborah Brown, Controller John Chang, Treasurer Bill Lockyer, and Attorney General Jerry Brown.
How much of a price did the political figures who voted in favor of the same-sex marriage bill pay in the most recent election?
Well, again, according to Equality California and other sources, all of the 23 incumbents who ran for re-election in the legislature after that vote on same-sex marriage won re-election. So to answer your question, there was no political price in terms of their re-election that they paid for that vote.
All right. Now, turning to California legislative victories, how successful, if at all, have gays and lesbians been in gaining political victories in the California legislature?
Okay, I have reviewed a range of legislation over time to protect the rights and interests of gays and lesbians, and over the course of the past decade and more, there have been laws enacted by the California legislature prohibiting sexual orientation discrimination in a range of different areas. So those include employment, housing, public education, and labor organizations with respect to adoption, foster care, public contracting, insurance, state-funded programs, and business services. And these are, these are just some of the highlights of many different legislative victories that have been achieved in the California legislature protecting the rights of gays and lesbians. Some other examples would be the hate crimes law, punishment for hate crimes committed on account of sexual orientation. The recognition, as we've said, of domestic partnerships in California, in a series of different victories leading up to the broad domestic partner protections that we have in California today. And altogether, I've identified over 50 legislative victories for the LGBT community in the California state legislature.
Now, what is the history of legislation relating to the legal recognition of same-sex couples in California?
So, after the passage of Proposition 22 in 2000, which declared by statute in the Family Code that only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California, the California legislature, nevertheless, in two separate bills, both authored by Mark Lino, adopted laws that would make marriage gender neutral in California, basically attempting to reverse the outcome of Proposition 22. In both instances, Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed those bills. In his veto, one message he said, and I think it's been borne out of, by opinion of the California Supreme Court, that under the rules, constitutional rules for the initiative process in California, the legislature cannot amend or repeal initiatives adopted by the voters. And so, nevertheless, there was a strong showing in the legislature for changing California's marriage laws to make them gender neutral or to allow for same-sex marriage.
When was the recognition of same-sex couples first achieved as a legal matter in California?
The first domestic partnership law was in 1999, and it protected and gave benefits for domestic partners in California. That was the first of a series of domestic partnership bills that worked their way through the legislature.
And when were the first local laws?
At the local level, the city of Berkeley in 1984 passed this state's first municipal domestic partnership ordinance. The next year, the city of West Hollywood followed with a comparable ordinance, and in the next 15 years, 18 other municipalities, local governments passed domestic partnership laws.
And what did AB 849 pertain to?
849, if I'm remembering the number correctly, I think that was the one of the bills to allow for same-sex marriage in California to pass through the legislature.
All right. And how much support did that bill receive from various groups?
If you look at the bill analyses that are prepared in the legislature, there's a list of organizations that publicly support and oppose bills pending in the legislature. And AB 849, which was, again, one of the bills by then Assemblyman Mark Lino, received support from 224 organizations, including labor union groups, civil rights groups, local governments, other organizations.
And what was the ultimate fate of that bill?
As I noted, Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed the bill on constitutional grounds.
Now, how do you respond to the argument of Professor Segura that gays and lesbians are vulnerable to the initiative powers, or initiative process?
Okay, this is, again, my area of primary study and interest. So I've looked at this pretty closely over time and have developed some pretty well-settled views over time as well. And it is true that in 2000 and 2008, the LGBT rights movement and gays and lesbians lost ballot measure contests with respect to the definition of marriage in California. The first one, Proposition 22, was to codify the definition of marriage as being between a man and a woman. As I said, Proposition 8, as we know, was to reinstate that definition into the California Constitution. So those are the two times in California where a clearly defined issue that gays and lesbians took a position on affected them. They were unsuccessful in the initiative or direct democracy context. However, California voters have not used the initiative process nor the popular referendum to repeal or limit the legislature's other broad expansions of LGBT rights. Those that I've just described in some detail, as well as the state's very broad domestic partnership law in its latest iteration in 2005. So it cannot be said that those legislative victories were stripped away by the vote efforts through the initiative process.